For centuries, we've been told the Vikings were nothing but brutal raiders, wild men from the north who burned villages and vanished into legend. But what if that's only half the story? What if the Vikings didn't just destroy history, they helped build the world we live in today? Tonight, we uncover how the Northmen changed history forever. Imagine icy winds sweeping across the North Sea, longships slicing through waves, their dragon-headed prows glinting in the pale sun. These weren't mere warriors, they were explorers, traders, poets, and builders. The Viking Age, stretching from the late 8th to the 11th century, was one of the most transformative periods in human history. But behind their savage reputation lies a far more complex story, one of innovation, adventure, and cultural fusion that shaped Europe and beyond. For centuries, the word Viking has conjured images of fire and fury, longships storming the shores, villages burning, warriors with horned helmets screaming into battle. It's an image carved into our collective imagination by centuries of storytelling, from medieval chronicles written by terrified monks to modern television dramas that glorify chaos and conquest. But behind that myth lies a deeper truth, a truth that history has long overlooked. Because the Vikings were not just destroyers. They were creators, innovators, and bridge builders between worlds that had never before touched. When we peel away the legend and dive into the evidence buried beneath the soil of Scandinavia, a different picture emerges. Archaeological discoveries from Denmark, Sweden, and Norway tell of complex societies that valued craftsmanship, trade, and exploration as much as warfare. Long before the first raid on Lindisfarne in 793 AD, the people of the north were already skilled farmers, shipbuilders, and storytellers. They crafted intricate jewelry, carved runestones, and traded goods across thousands of miles of open sea. The famous image of the horned helmet? A complete myth. Not one has ever been found in a Viking grave. Those horns came from 19th century artists trying to dramatize the past, turning practical warriors into mythical demons. In reality, Viking helmets were simple, functional, and built for survival. The true power of the Viking wasn't in decoration, it was in discipline, courage, and ingenuity. Their raids, though brutal, were often calculated acts of strategy rather than senseless slaughter. The early attacks on monasteries and coastal towns weren't just about greed, they were about opportunity. Europe was fragmented and weak, its kingdoms divided and its defenses unprepared. The Vikings saw not chaos, but possibility. They mastered the art of surprise, striking swiftly from the sea and vanishing before their enemies could respond. But to reduce them to mere pirates would be a mistake, because while some came to plunder, others came to settle, and those who stayed would reshape the lands they touched. Take the story of England, for instance. While Viking raids terrorized its coasts, Norse settlers also built communities, farmed its lands, and married into its people. Cities like York, known then as Jorvik, became thriving hubs of Norse trade and culture. In these places, languages blended, traditions merged, and new societies were born. The line between conqueror and citizen blurred. The Viking didn't just take, he transformed. Even their approach to warfare reveals a surprising level of organization and technology. The Viking longship was an engineering marvel of its time, light, flexible, and capable of traveling across open oceans and shallow rivers alike. With it, they could appear anywhere England, Ireland, France, even deep into Russia long before anyone expected them. Yet the longship wasn't just a weapon of war, it was a vessel of connection. It carried traders, settlers, and explorers who brought with them not destruction but exchange. The Vikings were the great connectors of the early medieval world. From the icy fjords of Norway to the golden sands of the Middle East, their influence spread across continents. Archaeologists have uncovered Arabic coins in Swedish graves, silk from Byzantium in Danish burials, and even Buddhist artifacts from as far as Central Asia in Viking trading towns. These weren't isolated raiders, they were participants in one of the earliest forms of globalization. Religion, too, played a crucial part in the shaping of Viking identity. The gods they worshipped, Odin, Thor, Freya, Loki, represented the forces of nature, fate, and human struggle. To them, life was a cycle of battle and rebirth, courage and consequence. Their mythology wasn't about cruelty, it was about resilience. The idea that even in death, one could rise again in Valhalla spoke to a people who saw life as a journey of endless challenges. And it's this philosophy, this fearless confrontation of destiny, that may explain how they thrived in such harsh and unpredictable lands. But perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about the Vikings lies in who they were. Viking wasn't a race nor a nation, it was a profession. To go Viking meant to set out on an expedition, whether for trade, exploration, or war. Not every Scandinavian was a Viking. Many were peaceful farmers, craftsmen, and families who stayed home tending to land and kin. The word itself comes from Viki, meaning bay or creek, referring to those who set sail from the fjords to seek fortune elsewhere. This difference between the myth and the reality is vital, because it reminds us that history is not static, it's a story written by those who survived it. Much of what we know about the Vikings comes from their enemies, particularly Christian monks who saw them as agents of the devil. To the monks of medieval Europe, the Viking attacks on monasteries were not just physical assaults, they were spiritual ones. These were men who came from the cold north, unbaptized, unrepentant, and unafraid. But to the Vikings themselves, these were simply the richest and easiest targets, filled with silver, gold, and valuable manuscripts. The monks wrote of horror and blasphemy, and their words shaped centuries of perception. Yet, in doing so, they cast a shadow that hid the light of Viking achievement. In reality, the Norse peoples were among the most literate and expressive cultures of their age. Their runestone still stand today as monuments to family, honor, and memory. Their sagas, passed down through generations, are not tales of brutality, but of love, loyalty, fate, and the fragile balance between gods and men. Through their words, we see not monsters, but humans ambitious, adventurous, flawed, and deeply curious about the world. Even in their art, the Vikings reveal sophistication and skill. Their metalwork was intricate, their ship carvings breathtaking. They believed that beauty had purpose, that craftsmanship was a sacred act connecting mortals to the divine. Every brooch, every sword hilt, every wooden carving tells a story of a people who saw meaning in creation as much as conquest. And so, the myth of the savage Viking begins to fade. In its place stands a civilization that valued freedom, courage, and exploration. A people driven not only by the hunger for wealth, but by an insatiable curiosity about what lay beyond the horizon. They didn't just raid the world, they reached for it, shaped it, and in many ways, defined it. The real story of the Vikings isn't about destruction, it's about discovery. It's about how the children of the North rose from the frozen edges of Europe to touch every corner of the known world forever, altering the course of history through their spirit, their skill, and their unbreakable will to explore. When we think of the Vikings, the image that instantly comes to mind is the Longship, sleek, narrow, cutting through the mist with its dragon-headed prow and rhythmic thundering of oars. The ocean was their road, their battlefield, their destiny. To the Northmen, the sea was not a barrier. It was a bridge. And it was on this bridge of waves that they would change the course of history. The Vikings didn't just sail, they mastered the sea in a way no other civilization had before them. Imagine standing on a Scandinavian shore more than 1,000 years ago. The salty wind whips across your face, the water glints beneath a pale sun, and in the distance you hear the sound of timber creaking. Out of the fog emerges a longship 40 meters of pure innovation. Built with overlapping planks of oak, curved perfectly to glide across both deep oceans and shallow rivers, it was as flexible as it was fast. It could turn on a whisper, slip up rivers that no army could march beside, and strike with terrifying precision. This was the ultimate weapon of mobility, the perfect vessel for exploration, and the reason the Vikings reached lands others thought unreachable. But the genius of the Viking longship wasn't born overnight. It was the product of centuries of experimentation and necessity. The Northmen lived in a harsh, fractured landscape of fjords, islands, and endless coastline. Travel by land was treacherous, but the sea, though dangerous, offered opportunity. From the beginning, they were forced to understand its moods, its rhythms, its secrets. They learned how to read the stars, how to feel the pull of the tides, how to listen to the song of the waves. This deep connection with the ocean made them not just sailors but navigators of the unknown. Their shipbuilders, known as smeder, were both engineers and artists. Without the modern tools we rely on today, they crafted vessels that could cross entire oceans with astonishing precision. Each plank was overlapped in a technique called clinker building, giving the ship both strength and flexibility. Iron rivets held the wood together, while tar and wool sealed it against the elements. The result was a ship that could bend with the waves instead of breaking against them, a living, breathing machine born from wood, sweat, and imagination. And what truly made the Longship revolutionary was its dual nature. It could be powered by oars in still water or driven by wind with a single square sail. That versatility meant the Vikings could cross open seas one moment and sail up narrow rivers the next, raiding deep into the heart of Europe where no one expected them. Imagine their shock the monks of Paris or the rulers of Russia when dragon-headed ships suddenly appeared inland, miles from the coast. It must have seemed like a supernatural invasion, an army delivered by the gods. But while fear followed the Longship, so too did trade. These vessels didn't just carry warriors, they carried goods, ideas, and people. They linked the frozen north with the warm markets of the Mediterranean and beyond. Viking ships reached the shores of North America centuries before Columbus ever dreamed of the Atlantic. They sailed east into the rivers of what is now Russia, founding trade routes that connected Scandinavia to Byzantium and the Islamic caliphates. The names of Viking explorers Leif Erikson, Eric the Red, Ingvar the Far Traveler echo through history not only as raiders but as pioneers who expanded the map of the known world. In their voyages, the Vikings faced challenges that would break lesser men. The North Sea was treacherous, unpredictable, and often deadly. Yet they crossed it again and again, guided by instincts and technology that were centuries ahead of their time. Without magnetic compasses, they relied on the sun, the stars, and even the behavior of birds to find their way. Some used what's now known as sunstones, crystals that could detect the sun's position even through heavy clouds. Others used the color of the water and the scent of the wind to estimate their distance from land. To modern eyes, it seems almost magical, but for the Vikings, it was simply skill. The sea was more than just a path for conquest. It was a way of life. Every child growing up in the north learned to respect it, to fear it, and to depend on it. Their mythology reflected this relationship. The sea god, Tyr, was both a friend and a foe, a force that could bless a voyage or swallow it whole. To sail was to test one's fate, to measure one's courage against the unknown. For the Vikings, every voyage was an act of faith in their gods, their ships, and their own unyielding spirit. Their ships also reflected their social order and values. The craftsmanship of a longship was a matter of pride and prestige. A great chieftain's ship, with its ornate carvings and painted hull, was both a symbol of power and a statement of artistry. Each dragon head carved onto a prow wasn't just decoration, it was protection, a spirit meant to ward off sea monsters and evil forces. Even in death, ships held meaning. Many Viking leaders were buried with their vessels, believing they would sail them once more in the afterlife to reach Valhalla. The ship, in their eyes, wasn't just a tool, it was a sacred vessel of the soul. As their maritime mastery grew, so did their influence. The Vikings didn't just travel, they colonized. They established settlements in Iceland, Greenland, and even parts of North America. They founded Dublin in Ireland, York in England, and Novgorod in Russia. Wherever they went, they left traces of their craftsmanship, their language, and their laws. And it was their control of the seas that allowed them to build such an expansive network, one that stretched from the Arctic Circle to the edge of the Middle East. What's even more astonishing is how democratic the Viking seafaring world could be. A ship's crew often made decisions collectively. Every man on board had a voice, and leadership was earned through respect, not inherited title. This spirit of equality and shared danger bonded them together, forging loyalty that made them almost unbeatable in battle. The sea was the great equalizer out there. It didn't matter who you were on land. What mattered was your courage, your skill, and your will to survive. The very sound of a Viking fleet approaching must have been unforgettable, the rhythmic beat of oars, the creak of wood, the snap of sails, and the rising chants of warriors. To their enemies, it was the sound of terror. To the Vikings, it was the song of freedom. Their ships were not just their weapons. They were their homes, their temples, and their companions through storm and calm alike. Every plank carried the memory of voyages past. Every sail held the scent of distant lands. Through the mastery of their ships, the Vikings became the first great mariners of the medieval world. They proved that courage, craftsmanship, and curiosity could conquer even the wildest seas. Their longships carved invisible paths across oceans, paths that would one day lead to the discovery of new continents, new worlds, and new ideas. They were not bound by maps, borders, or fear. They were guided only by the horizon, the endless promise of what lay beyond it. While history often remembers the Vikings as ruthless raiders, the truth is that they were just as skilled at trading as they were at fighting. Behind every longship that stormed a monastery, there were others filled with amber, furs, iron, and silver sailing toward distant markets instead of battlefields. The Vikings weren't just warriors of the sword. They were warriors of commerce. They built a network of trade that stretched from the cold fjords of Scandinavia to the scorching sands of Arabia, connecting worlds that had never before been linked. In an age when most of Europe was still local, still isolated, the Vikings thought globally. Their ships carried more than plunder. They carried goods, culture, and ideas. When they set sail, they didn't just chase wealth, they chased opportunity. In every harbor they landed, whether in the British Isles, the Frankish Empire, the Byzantine East, or the Islamic Caliphate, they traded, adapted, and learned. They were merchants before Europe even had the concept of global markets. The Viking homelands Norway, Denmark, and Sweden were rich in natural resources but poor in farmland. The harsh northern climate pushed them to look outward. They traded what they had: walrus ivory from the Arctic, furs from the endless forests, amber from the Baltic coasts, and iron forged in smoky Scandinavian forges. In return, they sought silk from Byzantium, silver from the Middle East, wine from France, and spices from distant lands. The Vikings created the arteries of medieval trade, and through them flowed not only wealth, but transformation. One of the most astonishing aspects of Viking trade was its reach. Long before Marco Polo or Columbus, the Norsemen had already charted routes that connected east and west. They sailed down the rivers of Eastern Europe, the Dnieper and the Volga, creating trade routes that stretched all the way to the heart of Byzantium and the Caliphate of Baghdad. Along these routes, they founded settlements like Novgorod and Kiev, cities that would one day grow into the foundations of modern Russia and Ukraine. The Vikings who traveled these eastern routes were known as the Rus, a name that gave rise to Russia itself. They didn't conquer these lands with brute force. They built them through exchange. Imagine a Viking trader stepping ashore in Constantinople, the glittering capital of the Byzantine Empire. Marble palaces, domed churches, and bustling markets filled with the scents of spice and perfume. For a man from the cold north, this was another world entirely. Yet the Byzantines quickly learned to respect these northern visitors. The Vikings brought slaves, furs, and amber. In return, they received gold, glassware, jewelry, and fine fabrics. Many even joined the service of the Byzantine emperors as elite guards, the famous Varangian Guard sworn to protect the emperor himself. These men stood shoulder to shoulder with Greeks, Armenians, and Arabs, proof that the Norse world was already far more interconnected than most of medieval Europe. Farther east, the Vikings traded with the Muslim world. Arabic silver coins known as dirhams have been found in massive quantities in Scandinavia, buried in hoards that tell of vast, thriving trade. One hoard discovered on the Swedish island of Gotland contained over 70,000 coins from Baghdad and beyond. These coins reveal something profound. The Vikings weren't just part of Europe's story, they were part of the global one. Their trade routes connected the icy north with the deserts of the Middle East, creating one of the first true networks of international exchange. But trade was never just about goods. It was about relationships. The Vikings understood the power of diplomacy as much as the power of the sword. They forged alliances with foreign kings, negotiated treaties, and even intermarried with local rulers to secure their influence. Every marketplace they entered became a place of connection, a meeting ground where cultures blended and languages mixed. Archaeological digs across Scandinavia have uncovered everything from Arabic coins to Chinese silk and Frankish glass, each artifact whispering a story of distant lands and daring voyages. Their trade towns were marvels of early urban life. Places like Birka in Sweden, Hedeby in Denmark, and Koppang in Norway became bustling centers of commerce. Longhouses lined muddy streets filled with craftsmen, blacksmiths, and traders. Ships came and went daily, bringing exotic goods and foreign visitors. In Birka, archaeologists found scales and weights used by Viking merchants to measure silver with remarkable precision, showing that their economy was not one of chaos and barter, but one of order, trust, and calculated exchange. These were not primitive people. They were pragmatic businessmen who understood the value of credibility, reputation, and consistency in trade. What's even more remarkable is how adaptable the Vikings were. In every land they visited, they learned and absorbed new skills. In Ireland, they helped establish cities like Dublin, which began as Viking trading posts. In England and Normandy, they became landowners and integrated into the local aristocracy. In the East, they learned Arabic numerals and coin-making techniques. Wherever they went, they left traces of their presence, sometimes in the form of blood, but often in the form of progress. Through trade, the Vikings also became cultural transmitters. They carried ideas from one civilization to another like invisible cargo. Through them, goods from the Islamic world reached Northern Europe centuries before the Crusades. It was through these channels that Europe began to encounter the art, science, and knowledge of distant cultures. Every fur-lined ship that left a Viking port carried with it fragments of foreign worlds, pieces of knowledge that would ripple through time and reshape societies. And within their own ranks, this exposure changed the Vikings themselves. Contact with Christianity and Islam challenged their old beliefs, inspired new art, and influenced their politics. The once pagan Norsemen began to see beyond their gods, and slowly, new forms of spirituality and governance took root in Scandinavia. The merchant voyages didn't just bring wealth, they brought transformation. But make no mistake, Viking trade was not gentle. It existed in a world where raiding and commerce often overlapped. Sometimes the same ships that carried cargo one season carried warriors the next. Yet even in this brutal age, the Vikings understood something that would define global civilization. Wealth flows not from domination alone, but from exchange. Their genius lay in balancing both the sword and the scale, the raid and the deal, the conquest and the compromise. By the height of the Viking Age, their trade network had become so vast that almost no part of the known world was untouched by it. From the icy tundra of the Arctic Circle to the golden domes of Baghdad, the silver of the Caliphate met the amber of the Baltic and the goods of the East, passed through Viking hands on their way to the West. Their ships didn't just bring goods, they brought the beginnings of globalization itself. The world owes more to the Viking traders than most realize. They bridged continents when others feared the unknown. They laid the economic foundations of kingdoms that would one day rule Europe. And while history remembers their raids, their real conquest was quieter, deeper, and more enduring. It was the conquest of connection. When people imagine the Vikings, the first thing that comes to mind is battle shields clashing, axes swinging, and fierce warriors charging into chaos with no fear of death. Yet, behind that image of blood and steel, there existed a society with rules, order, and justice. The same people who sailed across the world to fight also built one of the most structured and democratic systems of law in the early medieval era. The Vikings were warriors, yes, but they were also lawmakers, visionaries who believed that strength meant nothing without honor, and power meant nothing without fairness. To the Norse people, life was a balance between chaos and order. They understood that the world was governed not just by might, but by law. They called it lag, a word that would eventually evolve into our modern term law. And at the heart of Viking life was something extraordinary, the Thing. One of the earliest forms of a parliamentary system in human history. Long before the rise of modern democracy, long before kings claimed divine right, The Vikings gathered in open-air assemblies to settle disputes, make decisions, and create laws that applied to all. The Thing was a meeting place, but it was also a symbolic living expression of the Viking belief in community and justice. It could be held on a hilltop, by a fjord, or beneath an ancient oak. Every free man had the right to attend, to speak, and to be heard. Chiefs, farmers, traders, and warriors all stood side by side, their voices joining in debate. Decisions weren't made by a single ruler. They were forged through discussion and agreement. It was noisy, passionate, and often unpredictable, but it was freedom. In the Viking world, law wasn't written down on paper, it was carried in memory. The law speaker, an elected official, was tasked with memorizing and reciting the entire body of local law during the Thing. Imagine standing before a crowd of hundreds, reciting generations of rules by heart, ensuring that every man and woman knew their rights and obligations. The law speaker was both historian and judge, a living archive of justice. His word held immense respect, and his duty was sacred. But even in a society that revered freedom, there were boundaries. The Vikings had no prison's punishment was swift and often public. Fines were common, known as wergild or man price. Every person had a value depending on their status, and if someone was killed or wronged, compensation had to be paid. The system wasn't barbaric, it was practical. It prevented endless cycles of revenge by turning bloodshed into balance. But for those who broke the most serious laws, murderers, oath breakers, or cowards, there was a punishment worse than death: exile. To be declared utlager or outlawed meant to be cast out of society. You lost your protection under the law, your property, your family, your name. Anyone could kill you, and no one would avenge you. For a Viking, who valued honor and kinship above all, exile was a fate worse than the sword. It was social death, a final severing of all that made life meaningful. Still, the Viking legal system wasn't just about punishment, it was about resolution. The Thing provided a space for communities to solve conflicts peacefully. Disputes over land, inheritance, and trade were discussed in the open. Oaths were sworn, witnesses called, and judgments made not by decree but by consensus. This was justice born from the people, not imposed by rulers. It was a radical idea for its time, and its echoes can still be heard in modern democratic traditions across Scandinavia and beyond. The connection between warrior and lawmaker might seem strange, but in the Viking mind, the two were inseparable. Honor in battle and honesty in judgment were part of the same code. A warrior's reputation didn't depend only on his victories, it depended on his word. To lie, to break an oath, was to destroy one's soul. The sagas tell of men who went to great lengths to keep their promises, even when it cost them their lives. Oath-keeping was sacred. It bound families, tribes, and even nations. Viking society thrived on this code of honor. Every agreement, every alliance was sealed with trust and mutual respect. Even in warfare, there were rules. Raids were often seasonal and strategic, and plunder was shared fairly among the crew. Leaders who failed to distribute wealth properly or broke promises to their men would lose loyalty and often their lives. The Vikings understood that leadership required more than strength, it required justice. Their approach to leadership was unique. Chiefs, known as jarls, were not kings by divine right. They were chosen by their people, and their power depended on the consent of those they ruled. If a leader lost the confidence of his followers, he could be deposed. This created a culture of accountability that was rare in the medieval world. The Thing acted as a check on power, a reminder that no one, not even the mightiest, stood above the law. In Iceland, the spirit of Viking governance reached its purest form. The Althing, established around 930 AD, became one of the world's first national parliaments. Thousands would gather annually at Thingvellir, a vast natural amphitheater of lava rock and river valleys, to debate laws and hear cases. Here, the echoes of freedom literally resounded through the landscape. The Althing was not just a political institution, it was a cultural heartbeat, a gathering of the Norse spirit of equality and self-rule. And yet, for all their order and fairness, the Vikings were still a people of passion and pride. Blood feuds could erupt when honor was stained, and vengeance could last for generations. But even in these moments of chaos, they sought balance through law. The sagas are filled with tales of mediation and settlement, of men who turned away from endless war through wise negotiation. To them, the true strength of a warrior wasn't just in his arm, but in his restraint. Their laws also reflected the status of women in Viking society, a surprising element for the time. Viking women had rights that many European women wouldn't see for centuries. They could inherit property, request divorce, and manage their own wealth. If a husband mistreated his wife, she had the legal right to leave him and reclaim her dowry. In many cases, women attended the thing and spoke on behalf of their families. This sense of mutual respect between men and women wasn't born from idealism, it came from necessity. In a world where survival depended on every hand, equality was strength. Even religion was tied to law. The oaths sworn in the name of the gods Odin, Thor, Freya bound the community together. Breaking an oath wasn't just a legal crime, it was a spiritual one. Justice, in the Viking mind, wasn't only about social order, it was about cosmic order. To uphold the law was to keep the balance between men and gods, between the mortal world and the divine. When we look at the Vikings through this lens, the picture transforms once again. They weren't savages who lived by violence alone. They were people who believed deeply in fairness, in responsibility, and in the shared duty of justice. They understood that power without law is chaos, and law without honor is meaningless. The same hands that wielded axes to defend their homes also built systems of governance that valued truth, loyalty, and the voice of every free man. Their legacy as lawmakers is as important as their legacy as warriors. They didn't just carve their mark into history through conquest, they built the foundations of governance that would endure for centuries. The Viking world was one of balance, a world where courage met conscience, and where even the fiercest of warriors bowed before the power of the law. If the Viking Age was defined by conquest and exploration, its true legacy was built not on the battlefield, but in the stories, symbols, and spirit that the Northmen left behind. Though their empire of the seas eventually faded, the cultural fingerprints of the Vikings remain etched across continents, languages, and legends. From the words we speak to the stories we tell, from the art we admire to the ideals we value, the influence of the Norse people is far greater than most realize. To truly understand the Vikings, we must look beyond their raids and ships and instead step into their world of myth and meaning. The Vikings didn't see the world as a place to conquer, they saw it as a vast web of fate, woven by unseen forces. Their mythology was rich, layered, and deeply human. It told of gods who laughed, loved, betrayed, and died, just like men. Odin, the wise wanderer who sacrificed his eye for knowledge. Thor, the thunderous protector of mankind. Loki, the trickster whose mischief brought both chaos and creation. These weren't distant deities, they were reflections of the human condition, embodiments of courage, curiosity, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos. The sagas and myths of the Vikings became the beating heart of their culture. Passed down through generations by storytellers and skalds, these tales were more than entertainment, they were history, law, and philosophy all rolled into one. Every feast, every gathering around a fire was a moment to remember the past and to teach the values of bravery, loyalty, and honor. These stories preserved not only the memory of heroes, but the moral code of an entire civilization. When Christian missionaries arrived in Scandinavia, they found a people with a mythology so deeply ingrained that even conversion couldn't erase it. Instead, Norse stories quietly merged into European folklore. Elements of Odin became mirrored in the figure of St. Nicholas. The Yule festival evolved into Christmas traditions, and even the days of the week still carry their names: Wednesday for Odin's Day, Thursday for Thor's Day, and Friday for Freya's Day. Every time we speak those names, we unknowingly echo the voices of the Northmen. Their influence also ran deep in language. The English we speak today owes much to Old Norse. Words like sky, window, knife, husband, and law all come from the Vikings. During their settlements in England, especially after the formation of the Danelaw region of Norse control, the blending of Anglo-Saxon and Norse dialects created a new linguistic foundation. The Norse language simplified English grammar, added new words, and changed its rhythm. In a way, every English sentence carries a trace of Viking legacy. But the Vikings weren't just wordsmiths, they were master craftsmen. Their art, often overlooked, was among the most intricate of the early medieval world. They saw beauty not as luxury but as sacred expression. Their carvings on wood, bone, and stone told stories of gods and heroes, woven into spirals and knots that symbolized eternity and fate. These patterns, known as Norse knotwork, still inspire modern art and design. The dragons and beasts that once adorned longships and jewelry now appear in tattoos, films, and even architecture. The visual language of the Vikings continues to speak, centuries after their tools fell silent. Their sense of aesthetics was everywhere, in their ships, their weapons, their homes. Even a warrior's sword was a canvas for artistry. Blades were inlaid with silver runes, hilts wrapped in patterns symbolizing courage and destiny. For the Vikings, to create was to honor the gods, and to craft well was to leave a mark on eternity. That belief turned every craftsman into a storyteller, every object into a message. And while the Vikings are often remembered for their pagan beliefs, their transition to Christianity reshaped Europe in ways few appreciate. They were not destroyed by religion, they transformed it. Scandinavian kings like Olaf Tryggvason and Harald Bluetooth adopted Christianity but infused it with Norse resilience and symbolism. Churches built in Viking lands were decorated with dragon heads and intertwined carvings that carried whispers of old gods beneath the new faith. In this fusion, a unique cultural identity was born, Christian in name, but still deeply Norse in spirit. The Viking legacy didn't stop at religion or language. It continued in governance, art, and exploration. Their stories inspired generations of writers and thinkers. The Icelandic sagas, written centuries after the Viking Age, became some of the most important literary treasures of medieval Europe. They influenced great authors like J.R.R. Tolkien, whose Middle-earth drew heavily from Norse mythology. Even modern fantasy, from Game of Thrones to Marvel's depiction of Thor, owes its existence to the tales of the Northmen. But perhaps the greatest legacy of the Vikings lies in their spirit, their relentless curiosity and refusal to accept the limits of their world. They were driven not only by ambition but by wonder. To them, the horizon wasn't an end. It was an invitation. This hunger for exploration planted the seeds for the later age of discovery. When you think of explorers like Columbus, Magellan, or Cook, remember that centuries before them, Viking longships had already crossed oceans and charted new worlds. Their courage set the template for the explorers who would come after. Even in modern Scandinavian society, echoes of Viking values remain. The emphasis on equality, community decision-making, and individual responsibility can be traced back to Viking ideals. Their sense of justice and self-governance lives on in the democratic traditions of countries like Iceland, Norway, and Denmark. The Althing, the world's oldest surviving parliament, still operates in Iceland today, a direct descendant of Viking political thought. The Vikings also left their mark on the lands they once raided and settled. In northern England and Scotland, place names still carry Norse roots. Towns ending in by or thorp were Viking settlements. In Normandy, the land of the Northmen, their descendants would rise to power and reshape Europe once more. Leading to the Norman conquest of England in 1066, from raiders to rulers, from outcasts to kings, their legacy rippled through every corner of Europe. But it wasn't just their power or achievements that endured, it was their worldview. The Vikings believed life was fleeting, that every moment mattered because fate was inevitable. This acceptance of mortality gave them courage, creativity, and an unstoppable will to act. They didn't wait for destiny, they shaped it. That mindset, that fierce embrace of life despite its uncertainty, continues to inspire people today. Their myths, their art, their words, their ships all were born from a belief that no story ever truly ends. Every death leads to renewal, every loss to legend. And in that belief, the Vikings achieved what few cultures ever could. They transcended time. Their world may have vanished into the mists of history, but their voice still whispers through the waves, reminding us that courage, creativity, and curiosity are the true hallmarks of civilization. By the dawn of the 11th century, the roaring age of Viking conquest and exploration began to quiet. The longships still cut through the cold northern seas, but something fundamental was changing within the Norse world. The fierce independence that had once defined the Northmen began to clash with a new force sweeping across Europe: Christianity, kingdoms, and the dawn of centralized power. The world that the Vikings had shaped through fire, trade, and discovery was evolving into something entirely different. But their story was far from over. It wasn't a simple tale of collapse. It was a transformation, a rebirth through adaptation, legacy, and influence. For centuries, Viking life was built on mobility, honor, and personal strength. Loyalty was to the family, the clan, and the gods of the old world. But as the Viking raids intensified, so did the pushback. Europe, once fragmented and weak, began to unite under kings and crosses. The monasteries that the Vikings once plundered became centers of resistance and reform. The spread of Christianity wasn't just a matter of faith, it was political, and it began to reshape the Norse world from within. At first, the Northmen resisted. The gods of Asgard were not so easily replaced. Yet, as trade deepened and as Viking leaders sought alliances and stability, the new religion found its way into the halls of chieftains and kings. Olaf Tryggvason of Norway, once a fearsome raider, became one of Christianity's most fervent converts, spreading the faith by both persuasion and sword. King Harald Bluetooth of Denmark, whose name now lives on in the technology that connects our modern devices, famously proclaimed himself Christian and built churches across his land. The old and new worlds collided, but instead of vanishing, they merged. Christianization did not erase Viking culture, it refined it. The sagas, which had once spoken of Odin and Valhalla, began to weave new meanings under Christian influence. Viking art, which once depicted serpents and gods, started incorporating crosses and saints, yet retained the same intricate style of interlacing lines and divine symmetry. The Norse people didn't abandon their identity, they reshaped it to survive in a changing world. This blending of pagan and Christian ideals created a unique cultural tapestry that still defines Scandinavia to this day. But faith alone didn't transform the Viking world. Power did. As Viking territories grew wealthier and more organized, the era of small independent jarls gave way to the rise of kings and nations. The once loose confederations of tribes and warlords began consolidating into kingdoms: Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Centralized authority replaced the chaotic freedom of earlier centuries. For the first time, the Northmen began to see themselves not as scattered sea warriors, but as part of something larger: a realm, a nation, a legacy. Meanwhile, abroad, the Viking story was writing new chapters in the lands they once conquered. In France, the Norse settlement of Normandy, literally the land of the Northmen, was thriving. Founded by the Viking leader Rollo, Normandy became a powerful duchy, and within a century, Rollo's descendant, William the Conqueror, would invade England in 1066, ironically. The descendants of Vikings would bring an end to the Anglo-Saxon rule that their ancestors had once raided. It was the final echo of the Viking Age, yet it reshaped medieval Europe forever. In the East, Viking explorers known as the Russ left their own indelible mark. They sailed down the great rivers of Eastern Europe, founding trade routes and settlements that would eventually give birth to the state of Russia. The name itself, Russ, comes from these Norsemen, likely derived from the Old Norse word rods, meaning rowers, through trade, diplomacy, and intermarriage. These Northmen transformed from marauders into rulers, becoming princes and merchants of Slavic lands. Their legacy merged into the foundations of Russian identity. As the 11th century progressed, the Viking raids that had once terrorized Europe began to fade. Not because the Vikings had grown weaker, but because the world had caught up. The targets that had once been easy prey monasteries, villages, and undefended towns were now protected by castles, militias, and alliances. The old economic model of plunder gave way to trade and taxation. Viking merchants found more profit in peace than in war. The longships that once carried warriors began carrying goods, spices, and silk. The sword had become the coin's companion. This transition marked not a fall, but a maturation. The spirit of adventure that drove the Vikings to unknown shores did not die, it evolved into curiosity, exploration, and cultural exchange. The same descendants of raiders became the merchants, sailors, and scholars of medieval Scandinavia. Their stories, once carved on runestones, were written in ink and parchment. The oral traditions that had kept their sagas alive were now preserved for eternity by Christian monks, ensuring that even as the old gods faded, the voices of the Vikings would never be silenced. Yet beneath this transformation lay a deep nostalgia for the old ways. The Icelandic sagas, written long after the Viking Age had ended, carry a tone of longing, a remembrance of a world where honor, courage, and fate ruled above all else. These stories preserved not only the memory of great heroes, but the essence of what it meant to live as a Viking, to embrace life's impermanence, to face fate without fear, and to believe that glory outlived the grave. Even the Christianized Norse kings carried echoes of their pagan ancestors. The Viking sense of destiny, of facing life head-on, remained a cornerstone of their identity. They may have prayed to Christ instead of Odin, but the fire that once drove them across oceans still burned in their hearts. Their new kingdoms carried the same restless ambition, the same thirst for discovery that had sent their forefathers to Iceland, Greenland, and beyond. In Iceland, one of the last strongholds of Viking independence, the world's oldest parliament, the Althing, continued to meet. It was a living testament to Viking self-governance and equality, where even the poorest farmer had a voice. While the rest of Europe was ruled by kings and emperors, Iceland maintained a republic of free men, echoing the ideals of the old Viking thing, where laws were made through debate, not decree. And though the Viking raids ended, their maritime skill continued to inspire generations. The same shipbuilding techniques that once carried them to North America, the first Europeans to set foot on its shores, remained unmatched for centuries. Archaeological discoveries in Newfoundland prove that around the year 1000, long before Columbus, Viking explorers led by Leif Erikson reached a place they called Vinland. That daring voyage symbolized everything the Viking Age represented: courage, curiosity, and an unyielding desire to push beyond the known world. As Europe entered the High Middle Ages, the Vikings were no longer seen as outsiders. They had become part of the European story itself. The blood of the Northmen flowed through the veins of kings, warriors, and merchants from England to Russia. Their myths and symbols lingered in the art and architecture of the age. Their influence was not erased by history. It was absorbed into it. What began as an age of chaos ended as an age of creation. The Viking world didn't vanish, it evolved. Their gods faded, but their spirit endured through the kingdoms they forged, the cultures they touched, and the ideas they inspired. The Northmen who once ruled the seas left behind more than ruins or relics. They left a legacy that continues to shape the soul of our modern world. As we look back across the centuries, the story of the Vikings reveals far more than blood, iron, and conquest. It tells the story of transformation. The Northmen began as feared invaders, their sails striking terror into the hearts of Europe, yet they ended as builders of nations, bearers of knowledge, and keepers of a legacy that still breathes through time. They reshaped language, law, trade, and art. They connected distant worlds and expanded the limits of what humanity thought possible. Their longships were more than vessels of war, they were bridges between civilizations. Their myths were not merely tales of gods and monsters. They were expressions of courage, curiosity, and the unrelenting human will to explore the unknown. Even their faith, once bound to Odin and Thor, evolved without losing its fire. The Vikings adapted, absorbed, and endured. They were not erased by history, they became its architects. Every wave that crashes against the northern shores, every saga still whispered in Icelandic winds, every word of English rooted in Old Norse carries a fragment of their spirit. The Viking Age may have ended 1,000 years ago, but its echo has never faded. It lives in our stories, our language, our sense of adventure, and our defiance against limits. The Northmen taught the world that greatness isn't only found in empire or conquest, it's found in the courage to seek beyond the horizon, to shape destiny with one's own hands, and to leave a mark that time cannot wash away. And so, when we speak of the Vikings, we are not simply remembering a vanished age. We are remembering a part of ourselves, the explorers, the dreamers, the storytellers that still live within us all.